Hello and welcome to this PMO Professionals live stream webinar on PMO tools, tips, tricks and truths. I'm your host, Ken Burrell. In a minute, we'll be hearing from Nicole Reilly, who's going to be sharing lots of useful information with us. So welcome to you all, whether you're watching the live stream or the recording. If you're watching the live stream, you need to be signed in to the YouTube events page, and we suggest that you resist the temptation to watch the live stream in full screen mode. That way you can see the comments, you can ask questions, and you can participate in the live draw. Speaking of comments, if you sign into YouTube and enter #win in the comments, that will enter you into the live prize draw, which we'll be doing at the end. Also, submit your questions using the chat function, and we'll be answering those in a live question and answer session at the end. If you're watching live, you might want to load up menti.com on a separate device, so we recommend using your phone for that perhaps, so that you can participate in the polls that we'll be doing as part of the presentation. And whether you are watching the live recording or the live stream or the recording, we'll be telling you at the end how to download the materials that we talk about in the presentation. So before we start, just want to make a quick announcement, which is that the PMO Professionals is not affiliated to or associated with any PMO tool software provider. So all the advice that you hear in this presentation, and indeed any advice that you hear from the PMO Professionals, is completely independent. So with that in mind, I would like to pass over to Nicole.
Hello, thanks very much for joining us today, everyone. So I wanted to start off with a couple of definitions. First of all, I wanted to talk about what portfolio management is and what it isn't. So portfolio management is about making sure that there is a balance of initiatives that represent the optimum allocation of resources. It's about translating strategic objectives into change initiatives. It's about monitoring and measuring the contribution made by those initiatives, and about facilitating effective delivery and benefits realization. It's also about making sure that lessons learned are captured and applied. Portfolio management isn't just a roll-up for reporting on multiple projects and programs. So that lets us move on to understanding a bit more about PPM tools, project portfolio management tools. And here's that word strategic again. You'll also notice that it's positioned as an enterprise-wide solution, i.e. not just intended for use by project delivery people. So what, you might say, why is this important? Well, many of the conversations we've had over the years with various different vendors have helped us to come up with this, our buzzword bingo card for why PMOs want a PPM tool. So let's consider these so-called drivers for change. How many of these are strategic, enterprise-wide, or about benefits realization or applying lessons learned? Dare we say you've got a full house though, but no prizes for this one yet because we've got the prize draw a bit later on. And here's our favorite, the single source of the truth. And we'll come back to this one a little bit later on. So I wanted to talk about something that I find is really helpful with PPM tools and understanding where organizations are on their journey with those tools. Now, this is something called a hype cycle, and it's published by our friends over at Gartner. And if you're not familiar with hype cycles, They're aimed at educating people about technology and its capabilities. Don't confuse it with the change curve. Even though it's a slightly similar shape, it's not the same thing. Now, we speak to a lot of organisations who are about 18 months into their PPM tool journey, and they're not getting the benefits they expected from that tool. They find themselves in the trough of disillusionment. This one right here. Their expectations haven't been met. But the question is, were those expectations realistic? Now that we understand a bit more about what PPM tools are actually meant to be doing. So I want to ask you out there where you are on your hype cycle journey by joining in with our poll. So if I flip over to the poll, hopefully you should be able to see the screen with a code. So if you've got Menti open, if you pop 4308284 in there, you should be able to participate in the poll, and hopefully we'll see some results come through pretty soon. So if you're at the very beginning, you might be sitting at the innovation trigger where you're looking at the market and trying to pick one. Maybe you're about to implement one and you're sitting at that peak of inflated expectations, thinking that it's going to make life so much better. Or maybe you are that 18 months into the journey and you're coming to that realization that maybe this expensive tool just isn't cutting it. Or maybe you're actually coming out the other side. I can see some there who are on the way up the slope of enlightenment. Or maybe no one quite yet, but you're at that holy grail of plateau of productivity. So just looking at all those results coming in there, most of you that are with us today look like you're at that innovation trigger and at the start of your journey. So that's great to hear, because hopefully that you'll find a lot of what we've got to say today really valuable. So I'll just take us back to the presentation and we'll carry on. So I know this one's a little bit difficult to see with the size of the screen, but bear with me because I'll talk you through it. This is what is known as the hype cycle for project and portfolio management. And this is from a couple of years ago, back in 2020. Now, this isn't about the tools per se. It's more about the approaches and methodologies that are out there. Now, this is just one of the hype cycles that Gartner publish across a range of different technologies. Now, what we can see that's really important on this hype cycle are the couple of clusters, one at the peak of inflated expectations and another one down in that trough of disillusionment. Now, the thing that all of these things have in common is that they need different ways of thinking and a certain level of maturity in portfolio management to be successful. Now, there are some really key points to note here is that this timeline actually extends out by more than 10 years. So some of the things that you can see on this chart that are making their journey through the hype cycle are more than 10 years away from reaching that plateau of productivity. And some of those things that are right down at the beginning, at the innovation trigger, are things like AI and RPA enabled PPM. Another really interesting one to note here, that just on its way into the trough of disillusionment are enterprise agile frameworks. Make of that what you will. So let's be honest, how many of you who've either implemented a tool or are thinking about implementing a tool would recognize this? Again, don't worry about what the actual detail is on the picture, but it's more about this is the famed Gartner Magic Quadrant. Now, this has been regarded as the go-to source of information for many, many years for people looking to buy PPM tools. There's a couple of important things to bear in mind about the Magic Quadrant. There are literally hundreds of these that are published by Gartner every year. You name it, there's a Magic Quadrant. Collaboration tools, email tools, you can find one about everything. The other really important thing to note, which I was told anecdotally a few years ago, and I haven't found anything to the contrary, is that only those vendors with a presence in North America tend to get included in this Magic Quadrant. So it's quite possible that you could be missing out on a whole raft of other solutions. Final thing here is that there's been a little bit of a change in this Magic Quadrant over the last couple of years, the pandemic years, in that it's moved from being the Magic Quadrant for project portfolio management to the quadrant for strategic portfolio management. So even Gartner's recognized now that there's a little bit of a repositioning that needs to go on here, and that the word project has been causing a few issues. So what's strategic portfolio management? So this is the definition that I've managed to find. It's about a set of processes and business capabilities that are about selecting the right investments to realize an overall strategy. Now, you'll notice here that there's no mention of the word project at all, and it's much more holistic in terms of an enterprise worldwide need for business agility. And there's a subtle expectation in here about a return on that investment. So the move to me is less about cost optimization and more about value optimization, the value of those investments to the entire organization. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about what we do at the PMO Professionals here to help people who are at that innovation trigger and thinking about implementing some sort of PPM tooling. We start with people. We interview a good cross-section of people from across the entire organization. And what we're trying to do here is understand the existing pain points that they have around decision making. It's not just a requirements gathering exercise. And what these conversations help us to do is to get a really broad understanding and an overview of opinions on the current frameworks and methodologies and tool sets. And they can also reveal some sometimes hidden concerns once we start to build up a little bit of trust during those conversations. So what we can do then and play back to our client is some sort of stakeholder mapping, some observations about the roles and responsibilities that exist today, and some observations about the capabilities and capacity that that organization has today. Now, one of the other things that we're quite unique in doing here at the PMO Professionals is using a methodology called the PMO Value Ring. Now, what we've got on this screen now are the headlines. Underneath these categories are a lot of different questions that we ask those stakeholders during those interviews to try and get to what's important to them about the PMO, what sort of benefits they expect their PMO and the accompanying frameworks, methodologies, tooling, etc., to bring to the table. Now, if you're not familiar with the PMO value ring, this is something that's the result of a 7-year research project that was conducted with over 100 PMO leaders worldwide. And there are only a handful of people in the UK that have this practitioner certification so that they can use this methodology. So as an output of this, not only do we get a really good indication of what's important to different people across different areas, but we also, by running it through a particular piece of software that comes with it, we get a suggested mix of PMO services that would meet those expectations and deliver those benefits. So then we move on to the second stage of how we work, and we look at process. So what we do here is we look at the mixture of processes, procedures, and templates that comprise the current organizational framework. And we try and establish some context. So we look at reporting and documentation, we look at touch points and handoffs, and we also look at governance and assurance activities. And we can look at projects, programs, and portfolio structure, or we can just pick one, which tends to be the project structure. And what we do to facilitate that is we use the P3M3 assessment methodology. Now that's because this is publicly available to all organizations to use for self-assessment purposes. And it's designed to highlight areas of risk that exist around the current processes. Now, what's shown on the screen here are what's called common perspectives, and they're basically used to group processes and procedures into certain categories. And what you get from that assessment is a 1 to 5 level score in each of these areas that are then aggregated to give you an overall score. And those scores range from 1 to 5, with 1 being the lowest and 2 and 5 being the highest. Now, it's really important to say here that low doesn't mean bad. It just means that there's more risk associated with those particular processes because they're slightly on the less mature side. So there's more opportunity for improvement there. What we do tend to say, though, is that if there's any organisation that's scoring overall less than a 2 on this kind of assessment, you might want to have a rethink about whether you're quite ready to get all the benefits from PPM that you hope to get. So moving on to the last part of how we approach this, we look at tools. And when I mean tools, I mean organisational tooling. What has the organisation got available to it now? Or what maybe is it planning to do in the future? Now, what we're looking for here is about optimising data, information, knowledge, organisational collaboration, and general decision support across the organisation. Now, I did say that I was going to come back to that buzzword bingo card and our favourite single source of truth. And this is where some of you might have been wondering what on earth Highlander has got to do with PPM tools. Single source of truth. There can be only one. Much like Highlander, this is a bit of a myth. With a strategic solution like a PPM tool, you really need to consider the interaction between all enterprise systems. And this is particularly important when you think about systems that run in finance and HR. So you might be thinking of tool sets like SAP or Workday as an example. And this is because there's a principle about master data management. and it talks about a concept called systems of record. Now, we could be here all day talking about master data management, so I'm just going to scratch the surface here. But it's about making sure that data lives in the right place and is pushed and pulled between systems, rather than creating inefficiencies and inaccuracies by trying to get to these single sources of truth, which actually are copies of data sets that very soon get out of sync, get out of date. It's just reality. Now, many organizations are put off by the potential when you talk about integrations. It's out of scope, it's too expensive, it's not something they'd even considered or want to consider. But what we say here is that it's really vital to consider how master data will get managed across your organization. Now, there's questions here about data ownership and data stewardship, but what I would say is there's a really good article on Wikipedia about master data management that will get you started with some of these concepts and help you to understand a little bit more about what I'm talking about here. Now, probably what you're also getting at this point in time is that this is all a bit bigger than the PMO. We're talking about strategy. We're talking about enterprise. We're not in the natural habitat of projects and delivery. And that makes sense when we consider what portfolio management actually is, rather than perhaps what we thought it was. So implementing a PPM tool is more of a business transformation, and it needs to be managed accordingly. If you're implementing a PPM tool, you need to make sure that representatives from all of these areas of the business are involved. It's quite telling often when we do speak to an organization and we ask about representation from enterprise architecture, and they say, oh, we don't have that, or it's not something we'd thought about before. It's quite telling about what stage they may or may not be at with their maturity. And once you've got all these covered, you also need to think about these things, ready for when you go live. Don't forget the operational based considerations, including what will you do if it all falls over? So who's going to be doing all this? If a lot of stuff is going to be coming the PMO's way, there's a lot of new stuff here that you don't do as part of your current job. Things like lifecycle management, things like data governance, quality. So you need to ask yourself some really honest questions here of, have you got the skills and have you got the bandwidth? But don't worry, we've got some free resources coming up to help you with that. Another piece of caution here. Now, we've been talking on social media quite a bit over the last month about investing in people and process, and how that goes way beyond having a training budget and the number of certifications that people get. If people are faced with inefficient processes, then they're trying to navigate through a world of workarounds, duplication of effort, and waste that ultimately slows work down. They're not inadequacies with the tool set. They're more likely to be inadequacies with the existing processes and working practices that have just been exacerbated by the introduction of a tool. And this is a big reason why organisations end up in that trough of disillusionment because they didn't have that certain level of maturity before they embarked on implementing a PPM tool. And they had those expectations that it would fix everything. But if things don't flow seamlessly now, why do we think that adding quite a rigid tool set into the mix is going to make that better? And here's a cartoon that we had on social media over the last couple of weeks. It really resonated with a few people. We asked, do you have these underpinning activities? And unfortunately, the reality is, if you don't, it's just pretty pictures for management. So we've given you several words of caution there and lots of things to think about. But if you're still determined to go ahead with implementing a full-on PPM solution, we'd really urge you to get strategic. Move beyond that buzzword bingo about what is in it for the PMO and think more about what's in it for the organisation as a whole. 3 basic prerequisites. Your P3M3 score is 2 or higher. You've got some really strong executive sponsorship in place, and you've got access to the skills and bandwidth in your PMO to support all those things we talked about earlier. Tip number 1, get your business case right. We speak to many PMOs who either haven't got a business case, or if they have got the beginnings of a business case, when we dig into it a little bit deeper, it's all about what's going to make life better for the PMO and not what's of value to the organisation. And unfortunately, an uncomfortable truth here is that nobody really cares what's going to make life better for the PMO. It's about what's in it for the organisation and what's the return on investment they're going to get. The next part, top tip number 2, prioritise really carefully. It's really easy to get caught up in extensive, exhaustive wish lists, including things like AI enabled, which we've already seen are more than 10 years away from being at that plateau of productivity. Those interviews that you did with stakeholders back in discovery and review will be really helpful here in identifying what is important to your customers. So quantify those benefits and measure them. The final tip here is about phasing in functionality. Now, this is about understanding how things fit together. There's a lot about data flows in here as well, but you will need to appreciate that some things will need to be introduced in a certain order to make other things work. Now, a really good example of this is you cannot expect to be doing full resource management from day one implementation. In our experience, it's a good 6 to 9 months before you can even contemplate doing it, because you need to get the data flows to and from HR sorted, and you need to get the organizational implications about capacity understood. It's not just about who's working on projects. Be realistic. Ultimately, please be realistic about how long and how much effort things will take, because going live is just one milestone and arguably the easiest part. It can't be a side project. You need dedicated resource over several months before and after vendors have been in to do their configuration and implementation part. Now, we hear from lots of organisations who want this all done in the next quarter. And then we layer on over the summer or over Christmas. So what if you're listening to all this and you're realising we're just not ready? Or maybe you've tried already. Maybe you have had a business case and you've been told no. So second poll here. What's the biggest barrier in your organisation to better PMO tooling? Now, I'll flip over to Menti again, and I'll just move that slide on from where we were before to the second slide. What is the biggest barrier in your organisation? The code is 4308284. I can see those votes coming in. Hopefully you can see them on the screen too. So we've got quite a good split so far. Money and cost, inadequate sponsorship, something else. Lots in the money and cost pot. Low maturity. Be interesting actually to know whether that was something you felt before you came today, or perhaps have realised by being here today. Definitely money and cost is right up there. So anybody else who wants to have a quick dive into Menti and contribute? Yep, I can see some more coming. Something else. Be interested to see the comments once we get to the Q&A section. Money and cost or something else. Okay, I'm going to close that down and come back to the presentation. Ooh, low maturity. One just diving into low maturity as we come out of the poll. So let's move on. So what can you do? You can go tactical. And what do I mean by go tactical? So this is a good place to start if you're not ready from a people and process perspective. Tactical solutions are a bit more forgiving when it comes to those rigid workflows as you fine-tune your processes and enhance your maturity. So if you're in spreadsheet hell at the moment, there's a lot you can do probably with the tools that you've already got in your working environment. And it's an approach that you can use to help you build a stronger business case by demonstrating the value and improving those, let's face it, quite sketchy processes if you're right at the lower end of the maturity. Here's Highlander again. We're back to there can be only one. So PPM isn't the only show in town. A full-on PPM tool isn't the only show in town. Also, one size doesn't fit all. We know this for lots of different reasons, but if you're running a program office or a project office, a big project office, you're really unlikely to be able to get the buy-in or the funding to get a full-on PPM tool. So you need to be able to do something else. So what can you do? So the Microsoft 365 suite is already on many corporate desktops, and it's about a lot more than just the Office apps or Outlook for email. There's a whole suite of applications here. I think the last count was about 22 different Microsoft applications without all the third-party add-ons that you can get that work really well with them too. Just to talk you through an example, Teams is used as your work dashboard, and you can chat, call, collaborate with anyone, anywhere. And if you add in apps like approvals or tasks or forms and those third-party tools, you've got a pretty good working dashboard there. And then once you add in things like SharePoint to manage lists and document version control, you've got Planner to run Kanban projects, and then you connect all of those sources up to something like Power BI, you've got what is beginning to take shape as a very, very basic tool set. Then the opportunity with things like Power Apps, Power Automate, and Power Virtual Agents can just enhance that as your maturity grows. So you might have seen about a month ago, a couple of months ago now, I did a showcase event for the House of PMO, which was called Power PMO. And that was all about how the PMO over at the Houses of Parliament have been using Power Apps to move their maturity onwards and improve their project management. So check that out on the House of PMO if you haven't seen it. But Microsoft isn't the only show in town. If you don't have Microsoft as an organizational platform, there's a pretty good chance you've got Google. Okay, it does need a few more third-party apps to get the full benefits out of it. But on a base level, you can use Groups and Meet to complement Mail, Calendar, and Docs for online collaboration with anyone, anywhere. You can collect data via forms and add third-party apps like Zoom and Trello from the Workspace Marketplace or Chrome extensions to stop you needing to context switch. And you can connect all of your data sources again to Google Data Studio, which is a very, very similar product. So get familiar with what is already available to you now and see it as an opportunity that you can build from and demonstrate that value with. So what we've done here is we've just added just a few tools, third-party tools that we've used over the years alongside things like Microsoft or Google to run PMOs. You don't have to sign up to high price subscription plans. A lot of these tools have very base free offers as well. And you can start to use apps like Power Automate or Zapier to get going on automating those workflows once your process is mature. But as I'm sure a lot of you are already thinking, there is a little bit of a catch with this approach. And that comes back to the investing in people and process stuff. With tactical tools like those that we've just spoken about, your IT department is probably going to need a lot of reassurance about the potential risks that these kind of tools could introduce to your organization. Now, again, that risk versus reward, it's a conversation that needs executive support, and you need, again, to have that strong sponsorship behind you if you're looking to go down this route. But if your organization actually wants to be fit for purpose rather than stuck in the past, there are conversations that you need to be having. So we had another little cartoon, an observational cartoon a couple of weeks ago about trying to run a really good workshop and thinking of tools immediately that could make it really good and really interesting. But the organization and the facilitator ends up being hamstrung by those organizational policies. So working practices need to be fit for purpose too. Now, be prepared. I also wanted to talk a little bit here generally about whatever route you go down, the kind of objections that you may come up against. with implementing any kind of new tooling. So first of all, you might recognize this as a portfolio director or a program manager. How much will they hear about this from their PMs? They're unlikely to really get involved, but you'll hear from them pretty quickly if it doesn't work. Will implementing tools for the PMO, not the organisation, distract the PMs from doing their jobs? But there's the unspoken ones as well. There's fear here. They might be concerned about the visibility and transparency that comes with these new ways of working, and their resistance can be quite strong. So then moving on here, I like to characterize PMs in this way, juggling all different things. More work for me, more policing from the PMO, let me just deliver. They don't generally like prescribed tools. Sometimes they become a little bit more receptive when they think it will save them time, or they can really see the what's in it for me. You often hear this one, particularly if you're dealing with contract or temporary workers. Why should they change the way they work? They're really going to dislike having to spend any time training. And maybe as a PMO, you can spin this into a positive. Yes, it will stop us asking you for something new every week. But again, there's some fear and motivating these reactions. So be mindful and try and facilitate the change without doing everything for them. Then there's us, the PMO. Beware of trying to change too much at once, no matter how enthusiastic you are. And you're aiming here for an evolution, not a revolution. Some of the resistance might come from people who've been around a long time. They've seen lots of initiatives like this come and go. And this is a very real fear for a lot of PMO people. Some organisations do see better tooling as a way to potentially reduce headcount. The roles won't be the same, but we would definitely not advise any organisation to consider removing a PMO completely. So top tips. Pilot. Having an agile approach really helps because you can fail fast, learn, move on before you go for that full implementation. Find a friendly project manager or two that can help you onboard a couple of their projects and act on that. Collate FAQs. Keep them refreshed as well. So set up an information portal online and in person. And you might even, as part of your tactical solution, have a chatbot or a virtual agent that can help you deal with these. Create feedback loops. So plan to floor walk and hold virtual office hours online where people can drop in with questions or concerns. But make sure you act on that feedback and keep people updated. So, finale coming up. If you take one thing away from today's session, whatever approach you're taking, strategic or tactical, focus on value creation. The return on investment, the benefits realization, the success metrics for the organization. This is a chart that I've used many times over the years, but It's the reason behind all of this. We're trying to find a way to capture and channel all that data, information, organizational knowledge we have and turn it into something called actionable insight. And to be actionable, they need to be affecting things that will happen, not have happened. And how many of us have walked into a room with a steering group or an executive and had questions like these? But they've all got something in common when you look into the structure of the questions. Notice the highlighted words as we step through them. Every time you go into this room, you get this. They're all forward-looking. There's questions about PMO value and talk about overheads always start because they're asking forward-looking questions. They're trying to make better decisions to be able to affect things that will happen, not have happened. They want to know what's likely to happen if things carry on the way they are, or what they can change now to affect a different outcome. And that's where the real value is with the investment in people and process. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming today. And let's open up and see if we've got any questions.
Thanks for that, Nicole. So we've had a few questions coming in, a few observations as well, but I think I'm going to lead on questions in the interest of time. So this one here is quite a long question from Atif. How do you manage expectations where end users think they will get an all-conquering PPM tool and senior management want to keep it simple and grow the tool over a period of time? So conflicting requirements there. How do you manage that?
I think it's less about the requirements as such. It's that disconnect that we talked about when we say we talk to people during our process and we help them to understand what their pain points are. We're talking to a cross section across the whole organization here. So that disconnect tends to be resolved quite early on when you play back those results in terms of the users having expectations of everything and the senior management wanting to keep it simple. I mean, there's a lot in here about cost as well, I think, and strategic versus tactical. But yeah, dealing with it really early and having that people focus right at the beginning, I find can help.
Okay, building on the people focus, we have an observation here from Becca, which is that how people work with any tool and process is going to be critical to the tool's success too. So yeah, I think we can agree with that. And a couple of observations on I think it was the second Menti poll, the barriers to PPM tool implementation. Yeah. So people who said other, people providing the data in a consistent way is one. We've got another one from here, buy-in and reluctance to use the tool. Low maturity, been trying to get momentum from improvements and finding it hard. Decompartmentalized ways of working at regional levels, another one for low maturity. Yeah, so that's it for observations and questions.
I think the important thing there is that you're not on your own in that. We see that a lot, and there are things that you can do to try and work around those.
Okie doke. What we need to do now then is the prize draw. I'll just get rid of the questions. So we've had some entries for the prize draw, which is some PMO Professionals branded swag. I'm just going to hit the randomizer here and see who wins.
Oh, lots of entries.
Atif. Congratulations, Atif. So, Atif, if you'd like to get in touch with us after the session and give us your details, email address, and your physical address, and that sort of thing, then we'll be able to send your swag to you. So, if I get rid of that and we go back to you, Nicole, for the free resources, we need to talk people through how to get hold of the free resources.
Yeah, I'll just talk you through that. So we've got some. Oh, that was the competition. We've got some free resources that we want to give away to help you. So you can see some screenshots here. They're quite small, but if you either scan the QR code or visit the bit.ly link, which is download PMO tools, you will be able to get PDF copies of either some example functional requirements, a table of contents for a handover document that we've used very successfully, and also a table of contents for a system administration handbook to make sure you capture everything you need to do once things are live and running. And we can help you with a lot of the things that you've raised today and a lot of the things that we've pointed out when we stepped through the methodology earlier. We've got a couple of services: independent advice on PPM tools. As Ken said right at the top of the show, we're not affiliated with anybody. We only give you advice on what we think will work best for you as an organisation. And then we have tools for teamwork. This is more aimed at that tactical approach and what you can do with the tools that you've already got access to today. So pop over to the website or use the QR codes and find out more about how we can help you there.
Thanks for that, Nicole. So just to wrap up then, just a couple of things to talk about, which is that if you're watching this live, you'll receive an email after the session explaining how you can download the free resources. If you're watching the recording, then there are some links around this video in the show notes that explain how you can download the resources. Either way, it's a sort of 2-for-1. The newsletter, sign up to the newsletter, and you can download those resources. So that's it for today. As we pointed out a couple of times in the show here, we're not affiliated with any software provider, so this is completely independent thoughts and advice that you're getting here. Hope you found it useful. Hope you're enjoying this series of webinars, and we hope to see you soon, either on one of these or at thepmoprofessionals.com. This has been a PMO Professionals presentation. Thank you very much, and see you next time.